Thank you, Tom and Bubba. The end of the year, I think, always affords us an opportunity to reflect. How did the year go? There are a lot of thoughts that I've had about Beech Grove, but one of the thoughts that keeps coming back into my thinking is that 2024 will forever, in my mind, go down as the year we tackled the hardest Wednesday night topics. And we did several. In fact, the entire year was that way. And so, you know, it's easy, I think, to think back about how did we do. This morning, I want us to get very individual, very personal. I want us to think about how did we do individually. Now, I've titled this, Did You Make Every Second Count? I would say the answer is probably no, and I don't even know what he's talking about here. So, but chances are pretty good we wasted a good bit of time during the year. But here's what we know. We've talked about most of this stuff before. Is that we know that it doesn't make any difference how much money you have, how much wealth you have, how many degrees you have, how big your house is, how fancy your car is. Everybody's going to die. It's going to happen. I mean, it is a fact. You know, and we can think about the fact that the Hebrew writer says, appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment. The truth is that when you look at those pictures, and those were carefully selected, you know, we've got somebody with wealth, we've got somebody injecting Botox, trying to look better. We've got people exercising, we've got healthy diet and exercise there in the bottom right, or as I call it, nasty food. We've got technology, you know, medical technology. We're doing, just think, how many years has it been since we thought that you could freeze somebody when they died, and 20, 50, 100 years from now we could bring them back to life? That was a long time ago. Now we're actually finding a way to preserve them before they die and extending life. And as the years get longer for mankind, I'm not always sure that I think they're getting better. But the bottom line is, you're terminal. I am too. And even with all of the medical advancements that lead us to believe that we could live longer or we can slow down aging, it is inevitable that at one point we're going to cash in all of our chips and go to the house. And we need to be thinking about the fact that it doesn't make any difference who you are, all humankind, all furry pets, everything is going to come to an end. And when we think about what we're told in the book of James, what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. I've always thought that that may be the singular best description ever of the brevity of life. And as somebody I heard probably as a kid talk about this verse, said that they always think about this verse when they go out on a cold day and they see their breath. Because how fast do you see it? How fast does it go away? That's a vapor. And that's what our life is like. And if you think about the fact that this picture shows a waiting room. People are waiting for results from the diagnosis. Sometimes they come back well and sometimes not as well. Life is in reality a vapor. Now, here's somebody that you have to be a die-hard hockey fan to know. In August, Johnny Gaudreau and his brother Matthew, Johnny was a star hockey player in the NHL. They were visiting his sister in New Jersey for her wedding. And on that morning, Johnny and his brother Matthew got up in the city of New Jersey and decided they were going to take a bike ride that day. And they went out and got on their bikes, and while they were riding their bikes, a drunk driver hit them and killed both of them on her wedding day. You know, it really doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how old you are. We were telling our friends Mark and Diane about somebody that I actually performed their wedding They have kids that are in college or beyond now. But he is, the father is only, we decided maybe he's in his early 40s now. And Christmas Eve, he's a cardiac nurse. Healthy as a horse, eats well, exercises, skinny. Had a massive heart attack on Christmas Eve. He's going to be okay, we think. But, you know, when I hear about things like that, and I see things like that, it reminds me how quickly things can change and how fast life can end. A couple of biblical examples, though, as we think about this notion about the brevity of life. One that I alluded to not terribly long ago, what we refer to as the rich fool. The guy, the farmer who had a big crop, he said to himself, what am I going to do? I don't have room to store all these crops, and so I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns and lay up and tell myself just kick back for many years and take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And God said, you fool. Your life's going to be taken from you this very day. And then at the end of verse 20, there is a phrase there that says, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? The easy-to-read version of that verse says, but God said to that man, foolish man, tonight you will die. So what about the things you prepared for yourself? Who's going to get those now? You know, I think about how many hours that we work. And as I've said to you before, nobody ever said at anybody's funeral they wish they had worked more. But what we have heard at many funerals is about somebody who worked and worked and worked and finally retired and had all kinds of things that they were going to do and never got to because life came to an end too abruptly. You know, verse 21 says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Maybe that's the lesson of the rich fool. The other one, though, it is also an interesting one. We call the rich man Lazarus in Luke 16. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple. Now that tells you that they're wealthy. I wore my sort of purple today. And has fine linen. And the verse says, they fared, I love this, they fared sumptuously every day. Now, some of you do that. I've eaten at Kenny's house. Some of you fare sumptuously every day. The verse goes on and says, but there was a beggar named Lazarus, and all he wanted was whatever fell from the rich man's table. He was begging for crumbs. They both died. They were buried. They go to Hades, and there they are in Hades, and they're conversing one to another. And the rich man says, please just dip your finger in water and put it on my tongue. This is terrible. And the response was, son, remember that in your lifetime you received good things, and likewise Lazarus, the beggar, evil things, but now he's comforted, you're tormented. That's the lesson. That's what we're supposed to take away from what we're doing on this side of death. As we approach the end of the year, I want us to take a very quick assessment. It's individual, so you can do what you want to with it, because here's where our life continuum is. It starts at birth and it ends at death. And so you consider the totality of your life today. And if life begins at one point and ends at the other, we've got this continuum up here, but where do you think today, if you were to plot on that thing, where is your physical life today? Would you say that it's close to birth? Would you think that you're probably somewhere, I don't know, about the middle, or do you think you're, getting long in the tooth like Eddie? Where are you? And when you think about that, and in some ways more importantly than where you plot that is, what are your feelings about that? I want you to take note of your feelings. Do you have a sense of relief that you think you've got a long time yet to go? Do you have anxiety? Do you have fears? Is there a realization that now the majority of your life is past? coming to an end. It's drawing to a close. And more importantly, how does that make you feel? Now, I want you to remember your feelings about that as we go forward. Okay, so here's what Jesus tells us. There is a spiritual life that's going to follow this one, and there's going to be two options. Jesus said both of them. Matthew 7, I will declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. That's at one end. The other end we have recorded, Jesus said, Matthew 25, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And so there we have those sort of two extremes to deal with. And we looked at the duration of your life. But here is your second question to deal with. Where are you on this continuum if you had to plot yourself today? Are you closer to the response that you don't want to hear? Do you find yourself in the middle? Do you find yourself pretty close to, well done, thou good and faithful servant? And now take note of the feelings that you have as a result of this question. Have you considered all aspects of your Christianity? Your relationship with God, with brethren? Have you considered your relationship with the world? And as you consider that, do you get a sense of relief? Or is there anxiety? Or is there fear? And so on that continuum, where would you put your X today? Now, let's take the two continuums and let's overlay them. Because we started out knowing that we start with birth and we end with death. And then we have on the one hand, depart from me, I never knew you. On the other hand, well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter into the joys of your Lord. And so we have to decide at this point, as you are getting closer to death, where do you fall in that continuum? Are you closer to well done, thou good and faithful servant? Or are you closer to depart from me, I never knew you? And the way that you're likely going to look at that is, if you're closer to birth than you are to death, but you're closer to depart from me than you really would like to be, you say, well, I've got more time. Hopefully. You know, I've told you repeatedly, I've always believed that the greatest thing in Satan's arsenal is to convince us that we have more time. That's what he's got working for him. Because if we believe we can fix it someday, he's got us. And so you have to decide, where are you on this continuum? And where are you in light of the birth to death table? And then here are the feelings that you have to deal with. Knowing where you are, do you have a sense of relief? Does it give you comfort? You know, there are people who I have known who not only were relieved and comfortable, but excited at the end of their life that they got to die. They were ready. And more than being ready, they were longing. They were looking for it. And do you have anxiety? Do you have fear? Do you feel like, oh no, I'm running out of time, what do I need to do? And so what we have to tell ourselves is, depending on where you plot yourself on birth to death, and where you plot yourself on where you think you want to be when you face what's described in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30 as being that judgment scene, where are you on that second continuum? And how sure are you? Because you need to make sure that you're taking every second and making it count. Remember what we're told in James 4. Life is a vapor. So that's what we've got to hammer home. We don't know how long we have. James says that our life here is but for a little while and then it's gone. That we need to make every second count, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're young or whether or not you're old. We need to think about what's happening on this side of eternity, and what we do really matters on the other side. So let's consider a couple of things to think about making every second count. First is, the reason why we exist is that we have to have a relationship with God. And we have that relationship, and we communicate with God, and we worship God, and we're expected to follow His commandments. And so if that spiritual continuum really matters, those are things that we have to think about how well we're doing. And so in communication, the only way that two-way communication happens with God is through prayer and via the Scriptures. And we've been talking recently on Wednesday night about the role that the Holy Spirit plays in helping to communicate between us and God. And that we communicate both our thanks and our desires or needs. He says, tell me what you want. And that God communicates what He wants from us through His Word. And passages like Psalms, the Lord is near to those who call upon Him, and Paul in Ephesians, pray always in all supplication. In the book of Acts, those who were in Thessalonica received the Word with all readiness because they searched the Scriptures daily. They're held up as a model for what we ought to be doing. But why should we do that? Because if one of the primary ways that we communicate with God is through His Word, it ought to be an almost everyday thing with us. You ever go an entire day without talking to your spouse? You ever like to? Why would you go an entire day without talking to God? 2 Timothy, all Scripture is given to us to make us complete, to thoroughly furnish us unto every good work. He gave it to us so that we would know what we're supposed to do, and more importantly, how to do it, and finally, how to know if you're doing it. The psalmist says, take heed according to the Word. That's what we're supposed to do. Make every second count in the way we communicate. Second, make every second count in our worship. Now, our purpose on earth is to worship God. We worship Him individually through our lives. We worship Him collectively when we come here. Worship is given to us as a commandment. It's not an option. We have to do it. And when John was talking to the woman at the well in Samaria in John 4, those who worship Him worship Him in spirit and truth. He's responding to questions that she had about whether or not Samaritan worship was acceptable to God. Or could we do it in this place rather than going down to Jerusalem? Hebrew writer says, let us offer acceptable worship and do it with reverence and with awe. Paul said in Colossians 3 that we're supposed to sing and with grace in your hearts make melody to the Lord. It is a commandment to do that. You don't have the option to sit there and not sing. You don't. And so when we're instructed that we're supposed to do it, you're supposed to do it even if it's awful. God's tone deaf. He wants to hear you because He loves what you say in praise to Him. And then in Hebrews 10, the passage that we always talk about don't miss worship. But notice what it said, don't forsake the assembling of yourself, as the manner of some is. What does that tell you? Some of the Hebrews weren't showing up. And you need to do that even more as you move down that continuum. Every second counts. And then we need to think about that every second counts in the way that we respond in keeping commandments. Remember, there are commandments for almost every aspect of our life. And the way that we are pleasing to Him is by doing that. Notice that the first three passages are all from John. And if I were to ask you, what's the one characteristic that you always think about, that you think about when you think about the writings of John, it should be the fact that he emphasizes love so much. And talking about keeping His commandments in all three of those. This is love when we walk according to His commandments. Keep my commandments, you abide in my love. In the love of God, that we keep His commandments. That part of the way that we demonstrate, God, we love you, is we do what He tells us to do. And then James says, but don't be a hypocrite. And it's more or less. Be doers of the word, not hearers only. A doer of the work. This is the one who'd be blessed in what he does. If we're thinking about what we're supposed to do on that continuum and make every second count, we need to think about how we're communicating with God. The second thing is, God left us a spiritual family here on earth for a reason. And I don't know about you, but I suspect, here's my feeling. I'd love to hear yours someday. I have a feeling that if it wasn't for the Lord's church, I would be nearly as faithful as I am. Now, we had a young man who was visiting with us recently that we talked about, who's moving down here from Connecticut, Kenny. And Kenny, just for years, read the Bible. And he said he found Jesus He found what God wanted him to do, and he found the church, and that's why he showed up at the Church of Christ. That's so unusual. Maybe not in third world countries, but in ours, it is unusual. And what we need to realize is that when God gave us other Christians to exist with, you have tremendous responsibility to help me go to heaven. And me, you. But do we realize it that way? That we're supposed to build relationships and support each other, and we're supposed to forgive each other. And in part of making every second count in building relationships, it is a simple fact. Do you want to go to heaven? I hope so. Do you like your brothers and sisters? Why would those two questions be in the same bullet? Because they are related to one another. And having relationships with brethren means that we are being and trying to exist and walking in the light. And those relationships are supposed to be built on things like love and patience and compassion and humility. And when you look at those passages, we say we have fellowship with Him and we walk in darkness and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light, He is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. What? What follows being in the light and walking in the light? Having fellowship one with another. God's wisdom always jumps out at me from time to time. And here's one of those. He knew how much we were going to need the church. He knew how much we were going to need each other. And He said, if you want to be in the light, you need to have the right friends. And that's what He's trying to tell us. In Ephesians 4, bear with one another in love. Romans 12, love one another with brotherly love. Notice this. And by the way, I pulled this from the English Standard Version because I like the way it was worded here. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. I said, I don't remember ever having read that way before. Outdo each other, showing honor to each other. 1 Peter 3, love as brothers. How do we do it? Tender-hearted, courteous, don't return evil, not contrary blessings. Know that you were called to do this, that you can inherit a blessing. How do we elevate each other and show them honor? Well, we do it with humility. And what is included in that? Well, 1 Peter 3 says, here's your roadblocks. Here's your building blocks to build that relationship. Make every second count when you're building relationships one for another. And then he said we ought to make every second count by supporting each other. We support each other in every sense of the word. Spiritually, physically, emotionally, economically, in every aspect of our life, we have responsibility to support each other. Now, I have been privileged to be let in on what you have done with the contribution last week so far for helping Ellis and his family. And I assume that you're going to find out about that next Sunday. How many of us are there? What are we capable of doing? Well, you're going to find out. Because it's pretty spectacular. It's what we do when we support each other. He says, warn the unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, sing along with the cheerful. I love that one. Pray for the sick, restore the erring, bear one another's burdens. What he's saying? He's saying, if you're going to support each other, make every minute count. Don't waste any seconds. And then he says that we have a responsibility for forgiving each other. Forgiveness takes meekness, it takes humbleness, it takes letting yourself go in the interest of other people. I don't like doing that. I would rather fight than give up. And sometimes giving up is absolutely the right and Christian thing to do. Have you considered what Christ has forgiven of you every day? If you stop to go back and think about how many sins in your life, both before you were baptized and since, God's forgiven every one of those. The blood of Christ continues to cleanse us from all sin as we call upon Him. Forgive one another even as God in Christ forgave you. That's how we're supposed to do it. Your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And then the classic parable of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 18. This one is painful to read. You know, a servant who had a great debt, and his master said, I forgive you of all that you owe me. You don't have to pay back anything. That servant who was forgiven had somebody who owed him a little bit of money. I want my money, give it to me. If you don't give me my money, I'll put you and your family in jail and I'll make you slaves. Jesus uses an example. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? Now that could have been from the parable. That could have been from God speaking to us. And that's the way I think we're supposed to interpret it. And then in John, if someone says, I love God, hates his brother, is a liar, does not love his brother, whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he hasn't seen? This is a commandment we have from Him, that we should love God, all must love his brother also. If we don't forgive, we don't love. Make every second count on the things that truly are of value to us. But then think about this too. We have responsibility not just to God. We have responsibility to the world. We have duty. And what we've been instructed to do is to spread the gospel and to stay away from worldly things. And we're supposed to make every second count with the world. And we parallel our love for those in the world as we do with our brothers and our sisters, just with different types of activities. And so when we find out that what we're instructed to do to make every second count with the world is we're supposed to spread the gospel, that the crucial commandment that we have as Christians is to preach. That your light's supposed to shine in the way, in a path of darkness, and that salt's supposed to flavor the world. The best way to show the world who Christ is how He's instructed us, what He's told us to do. Tell them what I said and preach the word and share the love. And in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, when Jesus said, we are salt, we are light, you know, salt's supposed to flavor. And I think about that light like a flashlight. It's always made. The church gave us little flashlights a couple of years ago. I still use that one a lot. It's amazing to me how that little thing can put out so much light. So can you. You can put out so much light. You can help people who are walking in darkness to be seeing in the light. And that's what He says that we're supposed to do. And then He says we're supposed to abstain from evil. We're in the world, but we're not supposed to be part of the world. And although we are to love the world, we're not to engage in the practices that will defile us. So we're creations. We're old, sinful creatures, need to be changed and put away and put to death. And a new person is supposed to be born as we change the way we interact with the world. Don't be conformed to the world, be transformed. Abstain from every form of evil. Have you ever thought about what 1 Thessalonians 5:22 would include? That's difficult, folks. Every form of evil? I don't even know that I know what every form of evil is. And 2 Corinthians 7, therefore, having these promises, beloved, cleanse ourselves from the filthiness of the flesh and the spirit. And then 2 Corinthians 5, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. We are supposed to be completely different people. I find the news fascinating often, particularly when things that people have done in years gone by are brought back up again. And some of them are pretty ugly things. I will tell you, I'm grateful that people don't do that about me. That's why I'll never run for office. I don't want them to know. You know, but if what we're supposed to do is to be a new person, we've got to make space for new people. So here's where we are. You know, if you're a Christian, you've got that continuum, depart from me, well done, depart from me, or well done, thou good and faithful servant. And where are you gonna put your X? On that continuum, how close are you going to be to where you want to be? Think about your feelings earlier. And for those who are non-Christians, it's not as difficult a decision, because here's where you are. Don't shoot the messenger. That's the only option. And many non-Christians are either unaware or uncaring. And if they're unaware, you and I have work to do. If they're uncaring, we need to keep praying. The Christians need to be bothered if we're not where we expect to be at this stage of our life and where we're trying to get to, and figure out what we're going to do in 25 that we didn't do in 24 to help make every second count. The psalmist said this, as for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, he flourishes. Wind passes over, and it's gone. And its place remembers it no more. Whether we're talking about a vapor, or grass, or flowers, or the wind that passes by, it's all the same. Life is fleeting. I may have to get the rope back out again. You know, the truth is that we know what we're supposed to do if we're not a Christian. We've gone over that list how many times. But here's where we need to think about is, where are we there? Where are we on this list? Are we closer to the well done, or are we closer to the depart from me? And what is it that you want to do to change that? Now, truthfully, there is no continuum. You know, you are where you are. And we have time to chart the course that we want to be on, because we made it to this opportunity. And you can make things ready, and you can get things right, so that the end of 24 sets you exactly where you want to be starting the new year. If there's anything we can do for you publicly, we invite you to come right now as together we stand and as we sing this song.